All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to be talking about a little bit of a unique topic for us today around financial factors of environmental and safety. Oftentimes, we're talking about the regulatory environment, the industry, software specifically around our product or chatting with customers. But one of the things I wanted to do is step back a little bit and look at some of the financial factors. We've talked about it in the past as it relates to like fines and lawsuits, but I want to expand upon that a little bit today. So we're going to be going into the financial factors of environmental and safety decision making on the webinar today, and give you some kind of broad overview of some of the factors that go into this decision making process, and ultimately leading to where I think a lot of things are going for decision making around like software platform purchases like Mapistry is understanding what's the cost of ownership of a software system like Mapistry, but also what's the financial benefit, both from a top line revenue perspective and a bottom line. So doing that value assessment. So I'm going to lay out a couple of key kind of things to think about from a high level, and then at the end summarize some of the factors to build those financial models and economic analysis of how do we think about the like payback period for investment in a software platform. I hate to be the bearer of slightly bad news, is that can be really hard, a lot of soft costs involved in it. But before we jump into it too far, want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to send out copies of slides and recording of this, and I'm always available to chat more about these specifics around the financial factors, how to think about the like payback period, ROI, value assessment of software. And on this webinar, with a lot of potential questions very specific to maybe individuals' use cases, I invite you to send me an email and maybe we can find time after the webinar to dig into the specific topics that you have. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ryan Janik. I'm one of the co-founders here at Mapistry, and a little bit about Mapistry. So one of our big visions, and I'm sharing this more now in 2022, is we want environmental and safety programs at an organization to really be a source of employee pride, customer trust, and investor confidence. And you'll see that reflected as we talk about the different financial factors that go into this as an environmental safety sustainability program. So that's our vision, is that environmental and safety programs are top line revenue generators. They save on the bottom line revenue. And really our mission, and you'll see me talk about this, is our goal with our software platform is to enable organizations, so we are very business focused, have that economic engine driver, but do it in a sustainable way, because we want to empower organizations to really make intelligent environmental and safety decisions. It's really about the decision making, and that's what we're enabling from our software platform in environmental and safety. And here's a couple of examples. You can go to our website, download previous webinars from customers, but this is how we're going about that. These are the organizations that we've really partnered with that have trusted us to enable that environmental and safety decision-making process to happen. So you can hear more about it from customers directly about how they're driving decision-making, how they've moved into a digital platform for their environmental and safety programs. And these are just some examples of who we've partnered with over the years around this and really driven forward the use of software in environmental and safety programs. If we step back and look at the problem that we're trying to solve, and this is a problem whether you're using Mapistry as a software platform for your environmental and safety, or if you're just doing it on pen and paper, like this is the kind of the state of the union right now, and what we're seeing out there is that the speed and complexity and consequences for environmental and safety requirements has really outpaced the bandwidth of staff. And staff is environmental, EHS, and operational. There is so much coming at people. I was looking at statistics, like number of new regulations in 2021, and it's growing 10, 20% a year on the regulations coming at you. And the demands for enforcement around that, which we'll talk about, has also ramped up. So not only are you getting more regulations, but you're getting more use of them from an enforcement, public records, et cetera. And the other thing is that just these traditional like EHS workflows, very manual, are just not sustainable. They don't make financial sense anymore. They can be very time intensive, which we'll look at and can actually lead to some of the like more direct or hard dollar costs that we can, we can pencil out of like how much time savings. So one of the things that I want to reiterate here, and you'll see it, and if you've ever tried to go through the financial calculation on this, is like environmental and safety decisions are complicated. They're multifaceted. They're not only going to have like legal implications, compliance implications, but just operational. And you've got hard dollar costs, soft dollar costs, a lot of ambiguous risks. If you're trying to calculate out like, well, what's my risk or cost of not investing in this? That's really hard to do without data. And if you have the data, even with that data, and you can run the analytics and say, we've had a bag house, it's come up in 3 of the last 12 monthly inspections is, having issues. Let's look at that from a replacement. Well, what's the cost if we don't do anything? What if we wait another month or 2 months? Why, the why now question too. So just want to reiterate that as you go through this, and especially if you're doing your own value assessments or economic analysis. It's complicated. It is, there's no way around it. So one of the things is it wasn't so complicated in the past. You could put papers in a file, simpler rules, minimal oversight. Could be pretty straightforward. You didn't have to get into these more complex, multifaceted decision-making models. It was pretty straightforward. It wasn't, you didn't have to have a lot of specialized skills. And as I said before today, the problem is that the speed and pace of this is outpacing kind of the bandwidth of staff and resources. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, even just from a workforce recruitment, hiring, retention, the great resignation, some of the stats on that is really driving companies to think about this more, even more, maybe not even proactively at this point as they're dealing with labor shortages. So a couple of the things we tracked in 2021 was, what's the impact of COVID? We moved to really digital, really collaborative, connected, people working from home, people working remotely. COVID impact, we're seeing that even more in late 2021, trickling in now into 2022 of like resignations. The stats are pretty staggering of how many people have quit jobs. That's had labor impacts beyond just the move to work from home, but labor impacts on like getting the work done. The other things, saw it in 2020, seeing it still even more so for 2021 as we look at like public data impact on brand reputation, the same on enforcement initiatives. COVID has put some inspectors, work from home environment, but what you'll see is a lot more like tabletop or digital inspections. So we actually saw rises in inspections. And then ESG, environmental, social governance, sustainability, SECs weighing in on public companies, and we'll talk about that as a downstream impact on non-public companies. Those are all some of the big financial factors, but some of the things that you're probably kind of the flip side of it that you're counteracting, if you're trying to be proactive, stay ahead of trends, is like, these are some of the things that we've heard mentioned as it relates to finance. It's the way we've always done it. Why do we have to invest in X, Y, and Z? Just hire a consultant. We don't want to internalize that or use software for that. Or flip side, we can automate this. We can fully automate this. We can save 40 hours a month on our air permit reporting by automating this with an integration. Or we got an NOV, hard dollar cost, everybody hits the alarm bells. It's something to actually address, pay the fine, fix. So all of those statements really have a financial factor and a financial decision behind them. The comment that we often hear, though less so now, is, that's the way we've always done it. I don't want to have to change, or I don't want to have to really do this. I want a consultant to it. That's a financial decision. That cost of doing nothing can be hard to quantify, especially when you're hearing, if you're an EHS professional, that, well, we haven't gotten an NOV yet, or we've got good good sites, or we've got a binder of those inspection forms. It's okay. We don't really need to like collect the data on that. There's no real value in that. And I think that's a false statement. But all of those statements that you saw in the previous slide, there's a financial factor and there's a financial decision behind it, because no decision is still a decision. You know, if you're not investing in technology or thinking proactively around how can I better improve my decision making in environmental safety, that's a decision to do nothing. So what are some of those factors? And we're going to look at 6 today, and I'll show you a lot more just to to think about, and it's even evolving. I gave a similar talk to this maybe 2-3 months ago to National Ready Mix Concrete Association, and it's evolved even in the past 2 or 3 months. I mean, with the resignation rates, with some of the stuff for like hearing about downstream impacts from SEC and sustainability reporting. But the 6 we're going to look at today in this environment is really just core compliance. What's our upfront financial costs and ongoing? Some things to think about as you build a value assessment model or a financial model for environmental and safety decision making. And then the standard that a lot of people made decisions around over, I would say, the past 5-10 years is just enforcement. Are we getting fined on a frequent basis? What's the cost of that? What's the cost of changing our behavior, our workflows, or our technology to address that? So regulatory and citizen enforcement. Couple of areas that I think are more emerging, and I think in EHS and operational leadership, these are the ones that are going to really separate the companies that are wildly successful and really can grow. And for that, and from a people perspective, personally, is like where are the leaders that focus on this and think about this, and especially for EHS professionals, thinking beyond just core compliance and no NOVs, but how can I impact top line revenue? Does that mean I enable my company to have better access to capital, that investor impact? What's the brand reputation? Can the environmental and safety program be a marketing asset as we look at winning jobs, talking to our customers? What are our customers asking us for? Can I be a partner to the sales team? The same from hiring and retention. A younger workforce is looking for technology in their job, faster decision making, more BI tools, data visualizations, not just fill out this inspection form and file it away in a 3-ring binder. Is that a retention asset? Do we get better people? Do we retain them? Or can we fill labor shortages with technology? Is that a financial factor we should be taking into account? And then looking at just shareholder value and some of the statistics on returns around that, as this environmental and safety decision making kind of permeates throughout the organization. So if we were to do a value assessment model, and it's something that I've been working on, thinking about more and more as we look at answering the question that I get of, if we're going to use Mapistry, what's the payback period on that software? What's the return on my investment? And that's a complicated model, and I would encourage you to reach out to me, and I'm happy to sit down and go through some of that with you. And I'm going to need a bunch of information from you, and I can help you build out that model, because it can vary from like, what's the rate of violations you get, what's the cost, to what's the fully loaded cost of employees, to how much time does it physically take for your plant manager to get out of their chair, walk out, do an inspection, come back, scan that form, etc. But a few of the components is like, age of your workforce, what's the vacancy rate on your open jobs, in EHS, does it make sense to invest in true automation? Those type of things go into this value assessment model. But factor one is really just core compliance. We've got a permit to operate a facility. What's that upfront cost? What's kind of modifications? Is that being done by consultants, EHS staff? What about equipment costs? Is there an ongoing cost for consultants, EHS staff, those type of things? What about operational staff? There's an ongoing compliance requirement and just cost of I need to allocate an hour a week to operations and production staff to do this kind of core compliance aspects of the job. Those are all kind of the costs to operate that we can build into a financial model of just like, these are the baseline costs. And some of the things to think about is data reporting, like what's the cost to run my air emissions report once a month, or even a sustainability report at the end of the year. What's the cost of sending out a spreadsheet if I'm doing a sustainability report, and every plant has to spend a day total digging through records for the year? That's 8 hours at a fully loaded cost for somebody. It's $100 an hour. That's $800 per plant. And then all that data comes back to a team of 2 people, 3 people, and they spend a month sifting through that data. And even then, there's a lot of risk associated. But we can figure out pretty quickly what the cost of doing those activities are. One of the things to think about, if you look at it, the average base salary of an environmental manager is $86,000. A fully loaded cost, when you're thinking about everything the company puts into that, that could be anywhere to 2 to 3 times X what that base salary cost is. So you're looking at an environmental manager cost, a true cost of 172 to 258K. And this is one of the things that comes up is, especially when looking at like software investment, it's like, well, it's free. I can have my environmental specialist just take care of that for me. It's free to me. But if you think about it from a big picture standpoint, and I think this is where operations and EHS leaders really need to be focusing, is like, what's the cost to the company? Is it, it's 258K a year for that one person is the cost to company. Well, how can I start reducing that? And this will become more valuable and more apparent when we look at like labor shortages and like, how do we fill open positions? Can I take this fully loaded cost and automate it? Can I put in software systems to fill this gap and really get a really great return on investment or a very quick payback period? And the reason that there's a lot of opportunities for cost savings and having a big impact there, and that is a bottom line revenue driver of like labor costs, is that can I automate some of these pieces of it? And the answer is yes, you can automate a lot of this, and you can make it more efficient, even if you're not fully automating it from some like the data entry, but just the efficiency of conducting and getting inspections to a place where you can report and analyze. So wanted to map out the workflow. If we break down one inspection, like what's the true cost of that? And I don't think people look at it in enough detail and think about each of these steps. How much time is this, and what's that costing the company? If I'm a batch plant operator, I got to go find my form. A couple minutes there, walk the site, fill out the form, and this is where it starts getting complicated. That's not, the difference between that and taking out your phone, popping open an inspection on a mobile app, walking around. Where it starts to get more time consuming is, now I've filled out the form. I could throw it in that 3-ring binder and just let it sit there. But what if I need to actually do something with it? Record retention, communicate it out, scanning the form, send the email, tell somebody at the maintenance shop to fix problem areas. This may or may not be getting to this, but documenting the fix. Responding to calls from an EHS manager. And on the flip side, there's an EHS manager asking for this, trying to look for this data. That's a cost too. This quickly adds up. And then you get an inspector come up, then we got to find it. We're scrambling, potentially descending down into an NOV. But these are all, there's a time associated with this, and that we can translate into a dollar cost for doing each of these steps. And then it gets into even bigger dollar costs when we're starting to talk about NOVs, etc. So some of those efficiencies that we've seen from on the Mathistry side, we've done some presentations. We did a great one a couple of years ago, right before COVID shut down a lot of in-person events, but we did it at NAM conference, and then again at one of our summits with Tina Lau of Lehigh Hansen, talking about how we use technology to cut down like audit questions. Can we make that process more efficient? So cut about a third of the audit questions and an hour on-site per site audit in terms of a time saving. So that means that she was able to take that hour on-site and put it into even higher value activities, working with the team there. And that's a huge financial boon, but how do you translate that to a dollar? And that's where the hard part comes, is like, how do you model that out and calculate what those value added activities are? But in terms of the time efficiency, we can calculate that pretty easily in terms of like, it saved an hour of her time. The other one that you can run a pretty good financial calc is like 75% reduction in inspection time, in terms of scanning forms, sending them to corporate, driving back to the office, emailing, calling, that kind of list of activities related to inspections. When you really get into it, you can start to see about a 50 to 75% reduction in time on just the basic inspection process, which is kind of that core compliance that a lot of companies are starting with from a software and digitization and automation perspective. The air emissions reporting, any kind of reporting, that's where you can start getting really big time savings, especially if we're going to talk integrations, which I'll show you about later. The same on the sample data. If we can drag and drop lab reports, that's huge amount of time savings from just manual data entry. Number two, financial factor, looking at regulatory and citizen enforcement. That hasn't gone away. We've seen it spread. Years ago, more just a California-centric thing. We're seeing it with Biden administration, EPA, DOJ, doubling the number of OSHA investigators. We're seeing it on the safety side too. With the shift in administration from the Trump to the Biden, we're seeing this shift from moving from compliance insurance to more proactive next-gen compliance tools, similar to under the Obama administration when we saw next-gen compliance. So really a growing need to be audit ready or inspection ready. And it ties into some of this public data set. But one of the things with COVID, and this is the big impact there, is that enforcement went remote, it's gone digital, and agencies are seeing this, and in many ways they're more proactive than private industry, which is, my big push is private industry should be getting out ahead of this. Is they're using drones, they're using digital inspections to really drive enforcement, because they realize they could do more. With COVID, they could conduct more inspections by sending out a bunch of requests for, documents saying, hey, send me 5 years worth of SPCC and stormwater inspections. And they could review it in their office rather than having to drive to the site. So we've seen huge time savings from an agency perspective, and we don't anticipate that changing. They're going to use this more and more. And we've written a couple articles and given talks about this, is companies really need to jump on this and use it proactively as a defensive strategy against this. The agency should not be more digitally advanced than you are as a company. You should be driving that forward a lot faster. And we're seeing that similarly, nonprofit groups, we've been talking about this for a few years now, in terms of using drones, especially from a compliance standpoint. So just more, it's the little things, those clean sites that give away the visual cues, those type of things. They're small, but they matter a lot, especially as we see things like this. And if you want to hear more about how to empower operations folks to have cleaner sites, take a look at a great webinar we did with MMC Materials in the Southeast US, Ready Mix, of what they were able to drive as an impact within their first year of using technology of cleaner sites, which really counteracts this piece of, if you've got enforcement actions, citizen groups, et cetera, using drones, that, having a cleaner site and being able to really have proactive compliance and maintenance can ward off some of these potentially. The other thing is tying back to the COVID impacts enforcement, looking at Texas data. They published an annual report looking at the number of investigations. Look at the jump from 2,700 in fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020, over 4,000. That trend is likely to continue. We're seeing this. This is an actual, actual data, hard data. Regulatory agencies doing virtual inspections and looking at what it can drive from an NOV perspective. And this is Texas data. And speaking to some folks on the legal side in Texas, they're seeing this more and more. And a lot of like external counsel is saying, to their clients, this is real. Make sure you're ahead of this and that you're not falling into this, the NOV category. Couple things, as the Biden administration has made appointments, starting to roll out enforcement strategy. We're going to see more of that as we go forward, and it'll be interesting what the legal strategy continues to be at the federal level. And many of you have probably seen me talk about this, but in terms of fines, this is the ever-present financial factor this is the I think one of the common areas people go to for financial decision making is how many NOVs did we get? What did it cost us? How likely are we to continue to get them? And those, because it's easy, it's a known dollar amount, but it's really tough to predict what's the potential for an NOV or a lawsuit or a fine down the road. And that goes back to you've got to be looking at the emerging trends, and even in your local area, what's happening, how active are regulatory agencies, and how active are nonprofits or citizen groups. And the same from federal level, national compliance initiatives have moved to national enforcement initiatives, focus on next-gen compliance. This is an area I think we'll see even more the use of technology in terms of, and we're seeing studies and even partnerships with state agencies and researchers more proactively sending out letters, looking at the ECHO database, the EPA database on water samples, in terms of looking at the data of who's violating consistently and running those through statistical analysis to better predict who's going to violate, and working with agencies to go and target those folks. And this is another area I don't think private companies are paying enough attention to, is what's that public data set, and what are the folks on the other side doing with that can potentially lead to lawsuits, fines kind of out of nowhere that can be really, really large. So a couple, from a dollar cost, is when we're looking at the economic analysis or the value assessment, is the mitigation of potential penalty costs. What's the likelihood that I'm going to get one of these? What's the likelihood I'm going to be able to negotiate this down? And then what's my spend on consultants and attorneys, which are typically 2x the external costs that I ultimately pay in a fine. So if I get hit with a Clean Water Act water lawsuit from a citizen group, they'll put in there that they want 56,460 per day, and I had 20 discharges, so they're asking for $1 million. The end settlement may be only 100,000, but that's going to cost me out the door to my consultants and attorneys another 200,000-300,000 on top of that. And then we got to think about all the operational EHS leadership time spent on that, which is where the real cost is. So these start turning into very, very expensive problems quickly. Even if I'm writing a check for a $10,000 NOV, the real cost of that is more like $50K because of all the time spent on it and the consultant fees. And you're talking about pulling in leadership and execs. And if you look at the fully loaded cost of what is 1 hour of their time worth, these can be very, very expensive, even if you're only paying $1,000, $10,000 NOV. And then there's the outsized, risks of what if we really get nailed? This was a Texas lawsuit, $50 million, and just sets the kind of the stage of this is one big facility that did not take into account this ongoing issue of housekeeping and environmental protection, and it turned into a very, very expensive problem for them. So Factors 1 and 2, kind of the standbys on the financial factor side. Number 3 is access to capital. And, one of the things is we're seeing if you're going out for capital, and it can vary, it can be private companies, it can be public companies, is investors are looking for more environmental data, more sustainability data, and that has a downstream impact if you're going to financial institutions. Maybe you're not publicly traded, but they have shareholders or they're publicly traded, and they're putting these requirements and disclosure requirements all the way down through what they're lending. So there's the potential factor of, do my capital markets dry up? Is it harder? Are there less financial institutions and investors that I can go to for capital to invest in growing my business? That could be a bottom line cost, but it could be a top line. If we don't get the capital to grow or fund certain operations, that can really hurt us on top line revenue. And this is another one that's really tough to quantify, but one of the things paying more and more attention to, and when I've talked to others about this, they've said that downstream impact is what they're really worried about, is what's the disclosures they're going to have to make, what's this potentially going to restrict from access to capital, and what's the cost of the business. The other one that can be bottom line, if you're really getting into the costs to some of your business, but it's really a top line thing. I think it's something that can be a positive that not enough companies are taking advantage of. One of the things is brand reputation. What are the public data sets? Do you make public data and public image a priority, good or bad? Is it something that your public data is going to hurt you for non-compliance? The significant non-compliance discharges, penalties, getting fined, bottom line costs on that. But can you use it to your advantage? Not make it a reputational risk, but can you use it as an advantage for winning jobs from a marketing perspective? And with the public attention on sustainability and environmental issues, I think it's an underutilized aspect of it. If we can run a report on our environmental program showing 98% completion rates on our inspections, this is how much CO2 we've dropped, this is our trending month over month on recycled goods, recycled concrete, water usage, etc. If I can run that very quickly, then EHS becomes an asset to the sales and marketing team, and that really can drive that top line revenue. But the only way to do that is to have quick access to data, good visualizations, and an understanding of how to use that in a marketing and sales capacity, and show that differentiation between competitors, that you're in front of this. And this ties into the workforce. Is environmental and sustainability issues are huge these days, and it's becoming more and more so. So what we're seeing is a proactive company, a progressive company, is going to be out there in front of that, promoting it because it's a competitive differentiator. And they'll even, put it to their competitor, like, well, you don't have this data, you don't have it in real time. Like, how do we know you're really doing anything for the environment? So how do you use that as a lever for winning work and jobs, even if your customers are not asking for it? The same is true for workforce, and this is a huge factor, and it's quickly growing over the past 3-6 months. We're seeing it more as a massive financial factor for decision making in terms of like software adoption and use. 38 million workers quit their jobs in 2021, 4.5 million in November. It was the largest month for workers quitting. That's leaving huge labor gaps. 36% quit without another job, and 40% of employees are likely to leave in the next 3 to 6 months. And there's multiple facets to this, but I mean, from a top line revenue perspective, like if you don't have the workforce available, that's going to hurt you there pretty significantly. And we're seeing that with job openings, especially in EHS, going open for very, very long times. In remote work environments, it's very tough. You know, if you dig into some of these studies, a lot of workers don't want to go back or have to relocate. They want to work from home. It's a big driver for us on the software adoption side is one, you can hire a wider workforce. If you're using software platforms, you don't have to be physically on site. You don't have to be grabbing that 3-ring binder. You can do more with fewer employees. So you can adopt a regional basis if you have distributed sites. And it quickly fills some of these gaps. The other thing is it's a competitive differentiator if we're going to give you as a worker the best tools you're out there in terms of efficiency and also the ability to work remotely. You're not going to have to sit at a desk every day. You're going to have that flexibility. These are the big drivers in the workforce. It makes filling those jobs easier and something to tout in terms of like, how is this EHS job different than the one down the street? Or how can I expand the pool of workers that I am recruiting into? The other factor is, you know, ESG and sustainability and environmental is a big factor for not only retaining employees, but recruiting them in. I know from our own hiring, the fact that we build software for manufacturing companies, transportation companies to solve environmental problems and sustainability problems is a huge driver. We're able to recruit some of the best people out there for that because this is such a big factor in their employment decision making. So using this as a marketing tool for workforce requirement is, I think, a little bit of an underutilized and has huge financial impact. And our sixth factor, and it ties back a little bit to number 3, that access to capital, is shareholder value. You know, one of the studies that's out there, 63%, you know, paying attention to this is going to result in higher returns. And I think this is one of the good studies to look at, and it takes into account some of those, or a number of those, like tougher to quantify soft costs. If you're arguing for spend on the environmental, social, governance, sustainability programs, this is a really good one to look at in terms of, if we take into account all these factors, are we going to improve our financial performance as a company? You know, in 63% of the time, that answer is yes. And there's, you know, the SEC and sustainability disclosures coming down. You know, there's been a bunch of stuff proposed. They're still waiting for the final rules. This should have big downstream impacts, similar to the access to capital. It'll be really interesting. We're seeing it more in supply chain. You know, some of your customers are probably asking you for disclosures. One of the things to think about is like, what's the time to do that? What's the risks? If I don't do it, am I potentially losing customers if I don't have easy access to this kind of data? But the time, the efficiency to pull this information and be proactive about it as a downstream vendor, if you're not a public company, is one of the things that you should really factor into that financial model. The other thing is it opens up a whole new risk avenue of disclosures if you're a public company. Not everybody on this webinar is a public company, but just this was an example in September of last year, what the SEC was sending out saying, hey, you know, you said there you did X, Y, and Z around sustainability, climate change, you know, we want to see this data. We want more information, and that presents a risk, and it presents a brand and reputational risk, you know, a risk from like a fines and lawsuits, in addition to like what we talked about as financial factor number 2, in terms of agencies, lawsuits. Now that the SEC is getting involved, it'll be interesting to see what that means for downstream for non-public. Like if I'm a public company and I'm relying on my supply chain, it'll be interesting if your customers are asking for you to report this data for them, and if they then get in trouble for it, what does that mean? So a couple things to summarize. You know, there's many known direct costs. You know, there's core compliance expenditures. There's many indirect costs, but we can look at the financial calculus for environmental and safety decisions. You know, a decision to use a software platform like Mapestry, what does that cost us that you're paying to Mapestry for a license, a setup cost, the one time, but what's my payback over time? What's the efficiency? And then from an investment standpoint in like equipment, you're weighing the time, but also you're weighing what's the risk of a lawsuit in the next 10 years if I'm looking at a 10-year horizon. What's the cost of that? What's the cost of having really clean sites? And that could be a combination of more time spent on operations, running a street sweeper. It's an investment in a better, regenerative air vacuum sweeper, but also in something that MMC talked about is like, if I'm doing the mobile inspections, if I'm communicating out tasks in Mapestry, it puts more focus and attention from operational staff. Now I have a cleaner site. What's the cost? What's the value of that as a company? So if I were to build an actual value assessment or economic analysis, here's some of the things to think about. What are my risks? What are my soft costs, indirect costs that are going to impact my bottom line? Is it workforce loss, access to capital, harder cost? It could be insurance premium changes or cost claims. But one of the indirect or hard things to figure out is like, how often will I get that claim? We can look at historical data, but how is that going to change? How are premiums going to change? The same with like brand reputation. What's the risk of that? What's the cost of that? That can be really hard. Similar on the top line revenue side, the flip side of it is access to capital. Does it get a little bit easier if I'm one of the most progressive companies out there from an environmental sustainability standpoint? The same thing around brand reputation, and there's an example here. If I can run my sustainability metrics in real time, I can be a great partner to the sales and marketing teams of like 5 minutes to download a visualization, and I'm putting it in every bid package, and my competitors are not, and I'm pointing that out as I'm a good corporate citizen in the community. What is that value? That's hard to quantify, but something that I would think about as you're building this financial factor, this model. Flipping back over to the lower left, the efficiency, what's the bottom line savings in my decision making? If I'm going to automate with software, I'm going to integrate in, can I save 40 hours a month on air emissions reporting? My fully loaded EHS staff cost is $100 an hour. That's $4,000 a month I can save that I'm going to compare against what I'm spending on something like Mapestry. If I'm spending $500 a month or $1,000 a month, that's a really nice payback period if I can automate that. So to wrap things up, wanted to give everybody here a quick overview of what we do on the software side and the counterbalance to some of these financial factors and where we can have impact. One of the things, plan, do, check, act from a top line perspective, a big part of this is the doing part, enabling staff to actually capture the data. What's the financial factor of that? And then checking up on it, I think that's harder to quantify as we look into the financial factors, like checking on it. What's the reward? What's the benefit, either from a top line, bottom line on the checking and the acting side? It starts to get tougher. It's easier on the do side because we could potentially look at a direct time savings on the software side. It ggets harder when we go into check and act. It gets a little bit fuzzier. There's a little bit more probability modeling into it. But it's an overall picture of the Mapestry platform in looking at it and all the different parts that go into it. Where some of the biggest financial impacts can be is around this automation, the API we've released in terms of integrating in and automating data entry. The same with on the bottom is from a tasks, inspections, data logging side, is being able to quickly and easily communicate that out, and estimating that is the time savings on that is one of the biggest financial factors out there. Ultimately, getting up to the analytics reporting is what's the value of being able to run those visualizations for sales and marketing? Can you quantify how many more jobs you're going to win because of it? So Some of the things to think about is like, what's the value from an analytics side, both from a top line revenue growth standpoint, can I pull analytics very quickly, to just decision making around, where are we struggling? Where's their poor performance from a plant manager perspective, or where there's great performance? We've heard at our summit, how many people got promoted because they had analytics showing how much they're able to do, and how intensive EHS can be that was kind of going unnoticed by operations. That's a huge financial benefit for many people on a personal level, because of the analytics that they're able to see. It's like, whoa, you're inspecting 15,000 points every year. That's a ton, that on a personal level, and for the program, that's a huge win. And from a reporting standpoint, this is often where we see time savings, especially around air and water, being able to pull this data in, run reports quickly. One of the bigger financial impacts out there. On the financial factors, softer side, alerts, what's the value of knowing in real time, potentially warding off inspectors by knowing about like exceedances or problems. But sometimes it's just about knowing where compliance gaps are. One of the biggest impacts is an MMC, in terms of like being able to communicate. If we are going to automate an email out and send it out, saying, hey, this needs to be fixed, like it's a time savings to not have to chase somebody down, to communicate, to document. So can we automate that from an alerting perspective? Inspections, this is a tough one on the financial side for us, because if you're not doing inspections at all, it's really tough to go against that. It's also tough to counteract on a financial argument on like pencil whipping. If you sit in your office, pull out the sheet of paper, you go check down the whole thing. Some people look at that cost as like, it's 15 minutes, that's easy. But you're not getting the true cost of like, what about all the stuff you missed? So oftentimes for inspections, my bar is, can we make it largely break even to do the inspection? Is it as fast to do an inspection on a mobile app as it was to walk around with a piece of paper? Because if that's the case, the financial benefit and the time savings and all to have those analytics and to run the numbers and alerts is huge. So if I can, at a minimum, be a one-to-one trade-off, for I pull out my mobile phone, I walk around, I snap a photo. Usually we're much better than that, because people know exactly what they need to do. You can handle personnel changeover at the site better with the mobile app, because there's a single system and it'll walk them through it. So usually it's a win just on the inspection process alone. But where we run into problems, in all honesty, is if people really aren't doing inspections, it's tough to fight that. The other thing from a mapping perspective, where we've seen big financial impacts here, is just not having to go to a CAD department, not have to hire a CAD person or pay an external consultant. Those are some of the biggest financial wins, is the mapping platform, of just not paying consultant fees. We did a case study with Sims Metal Management, about $1,000 a year just on the mapping per site. Just not having to go to a consultant for like an SPCC map update, etc. Data capture, biggest financial factor for us in terms of time savings, cost savings, and one of the things I'm really excited about in 2022, and this is something you should talk to me or others if you're not a customer or not, is like, how do we integrate in with your data and just do this all automatically? Because not only is it going to be a huge time savings, big ROI, big payback period, but then you can make those decisions and you can take advantage of all the other areas in terms of decision making and brand reputation, running sustainability metrics. So data capture, probably one of the biggest financial factors out there for us in our platform. The tasks tied to inspections, but just knowing what to do and making sure you're not missing anything. This is the biggest one, from like preventing NOVs, looking at a little compliance calendar around air inspections, etc. NOVs, lawsuits, tasks is really some of the biggest financial drivers there. Also from like a workforce, is if you've got labor shortages, you've got people coming in, you need to quickly train them up. Lehigh Hansen talked about this in previously, of like being able to have even, scale house operator go and see, oh, this is what I got to do. Click here. Here's my inspection. Okay, I know what I need to do, even though if everybody else is out sick. So I know this was a quick overview on a very complex topic of financial factors. If you have any questions, we're running out of time now, but if you have any questions, please reach out to me. The other thing is, if you want to look at a value assessment and run some of these calcs, as I said before, happy to sit down and go through some of this with you. I'm going to need a bunch of info in terms of, then we can talk through what are all the factors, what are some of the costs, like can we estimate how likely it is to get an NOV, what's your NOV numbers for the past maybe 5-10 years. We can build that financial model out, especially if you're thinking about it from a software purchasing standpoint, or you're already a map history customer and looking to show some harder like financial numbers on, like, we implemented map history and this is what we're actually saving or contributing to the company. Shoot me an email at ryan@maphistory. Well, I appreciate y'all being on here today. Shoot me an email if you have questions. We'll send out copies of the slides and a recording. But I appreciate y'all for joining me this morning. Thank you.